आप अगर एक सक्सेसफुल बिजनेसमैन हैं और अपने बिजनेस को नेक्स्ट लेवल पे ले जाना चाहते हैं तो आपको ये पॉडकास्ट जरूर से देखना चाहिए। इस पॉडकास्ट पे हमारे जो गेस्ट थे वो सिर्फ एक क्वालिफाइड चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट और कंपनी सेक्रेटरी नहीं थे, बल्कि ये बड़ी बड़ी कंपनीज को एडवाइजरी का काम करते हैं, जैसे कि बिजनेस स्ट्रेटजी, कॉर्पोरेट स्ट्रक्चरिंग, क्रॉस बॉर्डर टैक्सेशन, आईपीओ कैसे लाया जाए, एमएसएमई एक्सचेंज में लिस्टिंग कैसे की जाए और बहुत सारी चीजों पे ये सलाह देते हैं। तो हम ये उम्मीद करते हैं कि आप ये पॉडकास्ट देखेंगे और कमेंट सेक्शन में जरूर से लिखेंगे कि ये पॉडकास्ट आपको कैसा लगा। आप ऐसे और कौन से गेस्ट को सुनना पसंद करेंगे, जिससे कि हम ऐसे बहुत सारे अलग अलग गेस्ट और सब्जेक्ट एक्सपर्ट्स को इस शो पे लाएं और आपका नॉलेज बढ़ाएं।
So there is currently, as we speak, a huge IPO boom, and every second conversation is about IPOs, right? So there are lots of small, medium enterprises which never had access to capital markets are now accessing capital markets in the last few years.
Okay.
So in 2023, you had something like 125 SME IPOs.
Okay.
In 2024, we had 200 plus IPOs on this small and medium exchange, and they raised cumulatively, I think, around about 6,300 crores from the market.
Wow. You know, this whole thing about NEP reminds me of Mahatma Gandhi. So in 1927, Gandhi ji gave a speech in Wardha where he spoke about Nai Talim, and he spoke about experiential education, where he actually said that when you ask a kid who's given his 10th exams to choose which subjects to, take and, go further with his education, it is like child marriage. When I say India, I mean the Indian companies. The Indian companies have been inadequately formalized, financialized, digitized, and skilled. Do you think that is one of the reasons why India still has this unemployment problem? In fact, I would want to ask you, does India have a jobs problem or a wages problem? Manish, आप सबसे पहले हमें ये बताइए that these days there are so many companies wanting to tap the market. There is a IPO buzz happening in India. But according to you, since you advise so many companies, which companies are actually eligible for tapping the markets?
So there is currently, as we speak, a huge IPO boom, and every second conversation is about IPOs, right? So there are lots of small, medium enterprises which never had access to capital markets are now accessing capital markets in the last few years.
Okay.
So in 2023, you had something like 125 SME IPOs.
Okay.
In 2024, we had 200 plus IPOs on this small and medium exchange, and they raised cumulatively, I think, around about 6,300 crores from the market.
Wow.
And from Jan this year until date, we have already seen more than 128 IPOs, right? So the thing is that currently almost every medium or small enterprise who has never had access to capital, traditionally they have always depended on bank finance, right? So it's the first time they've got access to capital markets, right? And they're making the most of it.
Right.
So broadly, from a IPO buzz, since you mentioned it, at a very, very high level, in India we have two sets of markets, right? One is the large caps and one is the small exchange, right?
Okay.
So typically, it's called the main board. So all these years we used to have the main board, which is the Bombay Stock Exchange and the National Stock Exchange main board, right? Where you had IPOs which were larger in size, which is north of 400, 500 crores, right?
Okay.
Going up to 20,000 crores, right?
Okay.
And then of recent, in the last few years, you have had the small exchange. What the government has done in order to recognize the need for capital for small and medium enterprises, they have actually created criterias which are more relaxed than the main board listing, which is for small and medium enterprises. And they have relaxed the profitability track record, they have relaxed the net worth criteria, etc., etc. So, in short, any reasonable profit-making company, right, having a basic net worth should be in a position to come up with an IPO. Now, that does not mean everybody will be IPOable. There are certain factors that play. Right?
If you could explain.
Yeah. So, there are a host of intrinsic and extrinsic factors when an IPO is done. And one thing the entrepreneurs must realize, and a lot of them today do, is that equity capital markets or equity form of fundraising is actually the costliest. Right? When I say costliest, it means because you're diluting your own shareholding. Right?
Sorry. आमतौर पे लोगों को ऐसा लगता है मनीष दैट व्हेन यू रेज फंड्स थ्रू डेट यू नो इट इज़ वेरी एक्सपेंसिव और इंडिया में प्राइवेट डेट या प्राइवेट फंडिंग एक आम सी बात थी लेकिन जैसे आपने बताया कि कुछ सालों में ऐसा हुआ है कि क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट ने ये पूरा प्रोसेस एक तरीके से फैसिलिटेट किया है और नॉर्म्स को इतने सिंपल कर दिए हैं कि बहुत सारी कंपनीज़ की भरमार है जिनको आईपीओ लाना है लेकिन आपने एक बहुत अच्छी बात ये बताई कि raising equity or raising funds through equity is one of the most expensive ways of raising money. Correct. If you could, simplify what you're saying.
So very straightforward and simple. I'll give you a simple example. मैं एकदम simple example देता हूँ. आज आप कोई प्राइवेट सेक्टर या पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक के पास जाएं and if you have a reasonable business plan and typically India has a lot of collateral back lending. आपको आपके फैक्ट्री देनी पड़ती है उसके प्लांट एंड मशीनरी देने पड़ते हैं लैंड देने पड़ते हैं घर देना पड़ता है ब्ला 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 मैं आमतौर पे उसकी बात करूँ तो आज वो कैपिटल आपको 9% से लेके 12% पर एनम के रेट से मिलेगा
बिल्कुल
ठीक है सो दैट्स एवरेज डेट फंड रेज राइट फॉर बिजनेस व्हेन यू कम टू इक्विटी मार्केट्स व्हाट हैपेंस इज जो इन्वेस्टर्स इसमें पैसा डालते हैं उनका एक्सपेक्टेशन हाई रहता है वो कभी भी 9 या 12% पे पैसा एक्सपेक्ट नहीं करते हैं मगर मैं क्या बोलना चाहता हूँ कि इट इज़ नॉट दैट एज अ बिजनेस यू हैव टू गिव देम इंटरेस्ट मगर जब आप आपकी कंपनी में पैसा डालते हैं तो उनका एक्सप्लिसिट अंडरस्टैंडिंग ये रहता है कि नहीं ये शेयर जब लिस्ट होगा तब ये 20 गुना बढ़ेगा 25% गुनेगा 25% ग्रोथ होगा 30% ग्रोथ होगा एट्सेट्रा एट्सेट्रा विच मीन्स वो कभी भी आपसे 9 या 12% के बेसिस पे पैसा नहीं देता जब वो इक्विटी कैपिटल मार्केट्स में डालता है
ओके
क्योंकि उसके अंदर रिस्क है अगर बैंक का पैसा नहीं गया तो सिक्योरिटी है बैंक के पास कुछ ना कुछ है जिससे वो पैसा रिकवर कर लेगा जो इक्विटी कैपिटल मार्केट में पैसा डालता है जो शेयर्स में पैसा डालता है उसके पास कोई बैकअप नहीं रहता है या तो कंपनी के शेयर वो अच्छे भाव पे बेच सके या शायद कभी भी ना बेच सके वो रिस्क से साथ डालता है तो क्योंकि उसका रिस्क हाई है ऑब्वियसली उसका एक्सपेक्टेशन उस पैसे लगाने से हाई होगा सो देयरफॉर implicitly raising equity is always costlier than debt. दूसरी बात डेट आपने एक बार लिया तो आप उसको 5 साल में पे कर लेंगे 5 साल 7 साल 10 साल जो भी है एक बार आपने आपकी कंपनी की इक्विटी डाइल्यूट की तो आपके साथ एक पर्सन आपके साथ एक पार्टनर बैठ गया लाइफ के लिए
राइट
तो लाइफ टाइम उसके एक्सपेक्टेशंस आपको मीट करने हैं
ओके
सो काफ़ी लोग ये नहीं समझते लॉट ऑफ पीपल डोंट अंडरस्टैंड दैट व्हेन यू टेक अ पार्टनर इट्स लाइक अ मैरिज राइट यू हैव टू बी विद दैट पार्टनर और अ सेट ऑफ पार्टनर्स फॉर लाइफ राइट आईपीओ के तौर पे ये इन्वेस्टर्स आएंगे इन्वेस्टर्स चेंज होंगे बट एक पूल ऑफ कैपिटल रहेगा विच विल कॉन्स्टेंटली बी एक्सटर्नली हेल्ड नाउ यू हैव टू सेटिस्फाई द नीड्स सो एज योर कंपनी ग्रोज आपको जैसे आप खुद पैसा लेके जाएंगे बिजनेस कमाएगा तो आपको डिविडेंड देना पड़ेगा
राइट
आपको कॉन्स्टेंटली उस जो पैसे आपने लिए हैं उसको जस्टिफाई करने के लिए आपको रिजल्ट्स डिक्लेयर करने पड़ेंगे सो इट्स अ डिफरेंट बॉल गेम
ओके
करंटली पीपल आर इन द माइंडसेट कि पैसा मिल रहा है ले लेंगे काफ़ी अच्छी कंपनियां भी आ रही है बट एक इम्प्लिसिट थॉट ये रहना चाहिए कि मैं जिस चीज़ में जा रहा हूँ इज एन इरिवर्सिबल थिंग नाउ बिकॉज वंस आई एम लिस्टेड I am now on a treadmill, and unless and until I have a 5, 10, 15-year visibility for constant profits, business, growth, etc., I should not be doing that. Because till I've sorted myself out, because मैं तभी किसी को पार्टनर ले सकता हूँ जब वो पार्टनर के साथ मुझे लॉन्ग टर्म विजिबिलिटी का बेस मिले. मैं ऐसे ही किसी को पार्टनर नहीं बना सकता, और ऐसे ही कोई पार्टनर बनेगा नहीं. Right? So whilst the norms are very, very basic, right, the approach and attitude with which you have to raise money has to be very, very long term. So to sum up your question, equity capital markets will be far costlier than debt because of expectation of investors, and that expectations is almost for lifetime or a long time, and that's why you have to constantly meet those expectations. And that's why it is important to understand that. आज पैसा easily मिल रहा है तो पब्लिक ले रहा है, but I don't know how many of the entrepreneurs who actually know the implicit responsibility of taking this capital.
करेक्ट. आमतौर पे ये देखा जाता है कि in all the bull runs so far in India, we have seen promoters raising money through equity, and their main focus is to increase their market cap. और उनको अपनी कंपनी की वैल्यूएशन बढ़ानी है, और उसमें कई फ्लाई बाय नाइट ऑपरेटर्स भी आ जाते हैं, और जिसमें फिर इन्वेस्टर्स अपना हार्ड अर्न मनी निवेश करते हैं, और फिर दे बर्न देयर फिंगर्स. जैसे कि मैंने आपको कहा कि आज IPO की भरमार है, तो एक जो कॉमन इन्वेस्टर है, एक ले पर्सन है, मनीष, आप हमें ये बताइए कि वो कैसे बच सकता है या अपने आप को बचा सकता है.
So honestly, first of all, गवर्नमेंट ने आज की तारीख में रेगुलेशंस वाइज, सेबी ने, स्टॉक एक्सचेंजेस ने काफ़ी हद तक क्लैम्प्स लगाए हैं, काफ़ी हद तक क्या बोलते हैं, एंट्री पॉइंट को कंट्रोल किया हुआ है.
सो देयर इज अ एंट्री बैरियर.
आई वोंट से एंट्री बैरियर, देयर इज अ सब्सटेंशियल रेगुलेटरी चेक,
okay,
on account of which it is not that every company can just come up with an IPO. Now, so that's the first check. Now that does not mean that certain people will still get through that funnel. Still they will get through that funnel. And that's where I come to certain intrinsic factors and certain extrinsic factors that make an IPO successful. See, आप छोटा IPO लाओ, आप बड़ा IPO लाओ, आप एक अच्छे बुल मार्केट में लाओ, आप एक बेयर मार्केट में लाओ IPO. फंडामेंटली कंपनीज जो लॉन्ग रन में अच्छा करते हैं, उनके सर्टेन इंट्रिंसिक फैक्टर्स रहते हैं. क्या बिजनेस है, कैसे प्रमोटर्स है, क्या ट्रैक रिकॉर्ड है. दीज आर नॉट चेंज्ड बेस्ड ऑन टाइम. these criterias were there even 4 decades back, and even today. Right? So there is the intrinsic factors of the company, right? Then there are extrinsic factors. क्या सेक्टर है, सेक्टर का क्या टारगेट एड्रेसेबल मार्केट है, इस कंपनी और उसके प्रोडक्ट या उसकी सर्विस इस मार्केट में कैसे डिफरेंशिएटेड है. तो किसी भी स्मॉल इन्वेस्टर को ज़्यादा टेक्निकल ना होके एटलीस्ट ये देखना चाहिए कि कंपनी के ट्रैक रिकॉर्ड क्या है, कंपनी के प्रमोटर्स का बैकग्राउंड क्या है, उनका एजुकेशन क्वालिफिकेशन क्या है, कितना टाइम उन्होंने इस धंधे में स्पेंड किया है, उनके डिस्क्लोजर्स जो प्रॉपरली सेबी और स्टॉक एक्सचेंज के माध्यम से दिए जाते हैं DRHP में, वो देखने चाहिए बेसिकली, राइट. और आज इतने एनालिस्ट है, इतने रिसर्च एनालिस्ट है जो काफ़ी नोट्स समराइज फॉर्म में कवर करते ही हैं. तो बिकॉज आज इतने IPO आप हर एक चीज़ का डिटेल स्टडी नहीं कर सकते, बट इतना तो आप बेसिक कर ही सकते हो कि आप इंट्रिंसिक और एक्सट्रिंसिक फैक्टर्स को साथ में लेके एक डिबेट और डिस्कशन इंटरनली करें कि what looks investable and what doesn't look investable.
Correct.
So these are some of the things that are generally used.
Correct. So एक निवेशक को खुद का अपना एक बेसिक ड्यू डिलिजेंस करना चाहिए, जैसे कि आपने समझाया. मनीष, आप हमको ये बताएं कि आज हिंदुस्तान में ऐसे कौन से सेक्टर्स हैं जिसको बोलते हैं फ्लेवर ऑफ द सीजन, जिसकी SME पे लिस्टिंग हो रही है, या ऐसे प्रमोटर्स जो करवाना चाहते हैं.
करेक्ट. सो वैसे तो अक्रॉस ऑल सेक्टर्स currently, because India is booming, all sectors are booming, so you can see multiple sectors coming out with or IPOs coming in multiple sectors across companies. But अगर मैं टॉप 2-3 बताऊं तो I think renewable energy is a very big flavor.
Okay.
everything in renewables, right? Whether it is solar or anything, ancillary, core industry, manufacturing related to renewables
Okay.
is clearly one flavor of the season.
Okay.
The second flavor of the season is manufacturing, capital goods, this, that, because manufacturing ka boom laga hua hai India mein. And third would be anything that's related to financial services, NBFCs, etc. Right?
Okay,
So,
okay.
I mean, that has been a flavor of the season most of the times. But
Correct.
these are the three key sectors where we find most companies filing and coming for new IPOs. That's what we see currently.
ओके आपको एआई स्पेस जो आज पूरी दुनिया में एआई स्पेस एक ऐसी स्पेस है which is hot in terms of investors interest and the kind of valuations that AI companies are getting. आपको इंडिया में what do you think इंडियन कंपनीज और जो इंडियन आईटी कंपनीज है क्या वो इस स्पेस को ठीक तरीके से एक्सप्लॉइट कर पाएगी?
सो क्लियरली एक्सप्लोइट कर पाएंगे और काफ़ी लोग कर भी रहे हैं.
Okay.
जो हम नॉर्मल कोर्स में न्यूज़पेपर्स में पढ़ते रहते हैं ऑन चैट जीपीटी एंड एआई एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट स्टफ, आई थिंक दैट इज़ वेरी स्पेसिफिक टू अ फ्यू कंपनीज वेयर दे हैव गॉट huge amount of investments to be done and innovate on AI and those platforms. When I talk about India, I broadly break it up into two parts, right? There is actual core technological AI which is being done by startups and more technology-led entrepreneurs. That's the core research, etc., or the coding that they are doing on AI, etc. And then there are a whole set of companies who are undergoing an entire digital transformation journey, right? All our topmost listed companies, almost every single company that I know of, right, has created a digital transformation cell which is working on either artificial intelligence or machine learning to drive efficiency in operations.
Okay.
And those efficiency in operations can be related to marketing, can be related to process-driven work, can be related to accounting, the finance function, from the HR function. All companies are trying to apply those concepts in action. So, momentum तो बन गया है. Now, adaptation भी बहुत है, right? Lot of consulting companies are now taking projects for manufacturing companies, for other companies, for helping them to do the digital transformation journey. So, to answer your question, AI का adoption India में absolutely massive scale पे हो रहा है और आगे भी होगा. As far as the core innovation is concerned, because the core innovation requires infrastructural investments, right? Huge investments in chips, huge investments in data centers, etc.
When you say chips, you mean the microprocessor chips?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and the Nvidia stock के बारे में
Yeah,
every
yeah.
other day
Yeah.
सब पेपर में पढ़ते हैं.
Absolutely.
So basically, to ensure that you are able to adopt and exploit AI at scale, right? You will need to have an infrastructure to be able to do that, right? And that infrastructure will need a lot of investments. Those investments are being done by people who have been flooded with money to take up these AI projects.
Okay.
Essentially, what I'm seeing in the Indian ecosystem, people are more talking about use cases of AI, trying to build on what we can do with AI such that life becomes easy, and then creating models surrounding that entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
Whereas when you look at globally,
Yeah.
right, we talk about the big tech companies, whether it is the Facebooks or the Googles or Microsofts of the world, they obviously have gone behind creating AI platforms.
Correct.
Which can be adopted by people, used by people to make their life simple. So
Yeah.
broadly, that is the scenario. So you have AI platforms being created, people using those platforms and creating business models surrounding those AI, and companies who are actually adopting digital transformation and using these technologies to empower them and digitally transform.
Fantastic. So you think AI will be a great enabler?
Totally.
Yeah.
So there is absolutely no doubt in my mind
Okay.
that there is going to be tremendous amount of disruption
Okay.
on account of AI.
Okay.
Is as good as, or I liken it to the internet revolution when internet happened, right? And people were thinking what will happen with internet will happen. And I think over the generations, right? And over humanity in general, we've always adapted. right? Because we are very smart as a race to adapt, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll adapt to this as well.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of disruption, and I can see a lot of disruption, and there's a lot of disruption that can happen also, and one has to find his place in that entire disruption, right? So that's what I believe.
Yeah, yeah. So when you talk about disruption, it reminds me of Yuval Noah Harari.
Yes.
You know, he's written a book called Sapiens. And after Sapiens, he wrote a second book, which is Homo Deus, in which he says that because of AI and biotechnology and whatever is happening in that space, we are going to have a global useless class. You know, people, because of disruption, they will be without work, and especially those people who don't adapt and adopt, you know, to this AI revolution.
Right. So in that book itself, the second series,
Yeah.
he concludes. Right?
Yeah.
So he concludes by saying that in his first book, where he has written about sapiens, right,
Yeah.
as how human race adapted and became the body that we are.
Correct.
Here also he concludes by saying, yes, there is disruption,
Yeah.
but there will be a method to the madness
Yeah.
that will emerge,
Correct.
which is not currently clearer, but it will emerge in some shape and form.
Yeah.
So I can see some root shoots of it, right? But the thing is, if we think that this world is finite and this is only that we can do with what we have, then we will have a situation where we'll see there's so many people whose jobs will be lost by AI, etc., etc. But if suddenly we expand this and say, no, this is not what the human race can do. Actually, the human race can do this much more.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Then suddenly the displaced workforce has so much other stuff to do, provided it has the skill to do it, right? And the background to do it. So I am an eternal optimist.
Lovely.
I believe that the human race will adapt.
And survive.
There will be disruption.
Yeah.
There will be losses of jobs. But along with that, there will be a lot of direction setting that these big tech companies, governments, etc. will do. And people who are able to see that, adapt, learn, and grow,
Yeah.
they will have multiple stuff
Yeah.
that they will be able to do.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So learn, unlearn, and relearn. You know, that should be the
Absolutely.
mantra. Manish, you spoke about startups when you were talking about AI. I want to understand from you, since you know you are in touch with so many companies, promoters. You are a regular advisor, you know, to these companies. The present political dispensation has also given a lot of thrust, you know, to startups. Where do you see the startup ecosystem going from here?
So I think India has one of the most vibrant startup ecosystems in the world, and I feel the future is reasonably bright. Obviously, there is currently, as we speak at this point in time, there is a funding winter in a lot of things that startups are trying to do.
Yes.
But the startup ecosystem, in my view, the foundational frameworks are very vibrant. I'll tell you why. So I think we have more than 800 plus startup incubators across the country.
If you could explain, what is an incubator?
So these incubators are so to call, these are like, put it this way, they are like small schools, right?
Okay.
Which take up startups and nurture them. Right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
let's say, so some of the biggest technological institutes like the IITs, the management institutes like IIMs have these startup incubators and
Okay.
cells.
Okay.
So what they do is that they adopt a few themes and call for ideas. Right? And if they find an idea at the seed stage, at the thought stage, at the initial stage is good, then they will incubate them, which means they will call them in their setup,
Okay.
give them the entire ecosystem. They'll give them infrastructure, place, etc., etc.
And the initial funding.
Yes.
Okay.
And so that they can take their idea from, let's say, a thought to a seed to somewhere else, etc., etc. So like that. So that's what an incubator is. And there are 800 plus incubators in the country. Most of them are affiliated to the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, where Government of India actually has carved out funding for them, basically. So the DST recognizes the legacy of those institutions, and based on those legacies, it carves out a fund, right, for them. Using that fund, these institutes go out and incubate
Okay.
these startups, right?
Okay. Okay.
Then in India, they have these Atal Innovation Labs, right? I think there are more than 60, I think, at the last count that I remember, more than 60.
Atal Innovation Labs.
Yeah,
So this word Atal comes from our honorable Prime Minister,
yes,
ex-Prime Minister Atal Bihari
Yes,
Vajpayee.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
And again, these innovation centers are doing similar jobs of trying to nurture startups, and some interesting startups have come. Good stories have come from them as well, right? And so all these put together, right? You have a vibrant framework, right? A foundational framework that is set for startups to actually grow, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we ourselves, as the company for which I'm a CEO, we are investors in a company called Zolvit, and we do something like a mini Shark Tank for many startups, right?
Okay, okay.
And in the last 3 months, we got something like 200 startup ideas, right? And so we try and connect these startups to some of these incubator companies, right? And at least 10 to 15 of them are currently being evaluated for incubation, right? The last leg is the entire what Shark Tank has done to India, right? India, to the vibrant India ecosystem. So
Yeah.
that has also been a good, so to called base for people to see what startups can do, and that entire excitement, that entire zest for entrepreneurship has been given. So a lot of things are going well for startups. So there's a lot of activity that is happening from idea stage to incubation, but from incubation to getting to the funding, it's a lot tougher at this point in time, unless and until you are able to show clear view of profitability, clear differentiation of product, clear talent pool that is going to take the company in the long run. You're not going to get funded to a large extent at this point in time.
So this you're seeing across all the sectors, because you know, after the debacle of Byju's, there was a problem, and there was funding winter experienced by all the tech education companies, you know, especially those companies which were trying to raise funds. But you're saying that there is a funding winter all across. In all the sectors.
I think it's the funding winter is in general.
Okay.
Right? And I don't think it is specific to any sector. Of course, EdTech is exaggerated because of what has happened with the company that you mentioned. But in general, I feel when I call it as a funding winter, I want to, again, as I said, I'm an eternal optimist, right? I think nothing stays forever. And at the end of the day, a good company will always get a good funder, right? And what is a good company is, what is your product market fit? What is your target addressable market? If there is clarity, if the team is good, you end up getting funding. So, for example, I'll create an outline and explain.
Yeah.
There's so much happening in the space tech industry, right? Now they are also startups, right?
Yeah.
But on almost every second occasion, as you see, you will see some of the other space tech company getting funded, right? Because clearly there's so much to be done in space, there's so much of technology to be built, and there's so many companies who are trying to do it. ISRO has done a great job in creating a separate body called InSpace, etc., trying to do it. So you have all of these, while you will have some or the other example to see that the funding winter is not like an absolute funding winter. Sectors and green spots where you can see unique innovation happening will find a backer.
Right.
It's not that the incubators and all have stopped working. It's not like that, right?
Yeah.
But large amounts of money, $1 million of capital that used to flow a few years back very quickly, that's not the case today. Right? So the focus is, as I said, positively, the focus is on profitability. It's all those unique Indian traits that we had, that we'll not lose money. It's on profitability. It's on unit economics. It's on scale. All of those things are being talked about much, much more than they used to be 4-5 years back, when there was free money available.
ब्रिलियंट। मनीष, आपने जो रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी स्पेस के बारे में बताया और बाकी सब जो जिसे हम सनराइज सेक्टर्स कहते हैं, आपने जिन सेक्टर्स की बात की, मुझे लगता है कि इंडिया में ये सारे सेक्टर्स बहुत अच्छी तरीके से परफॉर्म करने वाले हैं। मनीष, एक जो बात मेरे जहन में आती है वो ये है कि मैं, जैसे कि आप जानते हैं, आई एम अ वास्तु कंसल्टेंट, और मैं इंडिया में, पूरे इंडिया में टियर 2 टियर 3 सिटीज़ में ट्रैवल करता हूँ। आई गो टू द रूरल पार्ट्स ऑफ इंडिया ऑल्सो। और आज इंडिया में जिस तरीके का कैपेक्स इन्वेस्टमेंट हो रहा है, यू नो, वेदर दे आर एग्जिस्टिंग बिजनेस प्लेयर्स और अपकमिंग बिजनेस प्लेयर्स, तो ये जो आपने एसएमई की बात की, आप हमें ये समझाइए कि ये जो टियर 2 टियर 3 सिटीज़ में जो निवेश करते हैं और जो लोग अपना बिजनेस एक्सपैंड करना चाहते हैं, क्या वो ये इसी सेगमेंट में आते हैं?
एकदम बराबर। सो very 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 valid question.
Yeah.
And this impacts a large part of India's population. So I'll explain. पहले थोड़े statistics आपको बता देता हूँ. Small and medium enterprises का जो प्रोडक्शन है, का जो काम है, that contributes to almost 30% of India's GDP. Almost 120 million people are employed by these SMEs.
Oh, that's amazing.
And roughly around 40% plus of our exports and our industrial output comes from SMEs. So it's an absolutely vibrant, growing sector of the economy, right? And traditionally, क्या हुआ है? Most of these SMEs have always struggled for capital. The biggest source of capital for them used to be going to their banks or their private money lenders, etc., which has sometimes made them debt averse, made them very restricted in terms of the kind of growth that they can get. जैसे आपने बताया कि when you go there, you see so much capex happening, etc.
Yeah.
अभी SMEs के पास choices क्या है कैपिटल रेज करने की, राइट? सो एक था ट्रेडिशनल जो बैंक्स था, लेंडर्स था, एटसेट्रा. नाउ a lot of new avenues are opening up for them, right? So you have at the very bottom, right? You have for a very very small SME who has just started doing stuff, etc. You will still have those traditional models, right? You will have banks, you'll have lenders, etc.
Institutions, yeah.
Small of them, right? Smaller institutions. You have now small banks that have come up. You have those kind of institutions, right? Who are helping them. Slightly larger and growing small and medium enterprises can tap into small funds, right? Small. So there in when I say funds, these are the entire class of private equity funds, where they operate in 3 levels. There are smaller segment private equity funds, there are mid-sized private equity funds, and there are large private equity funds. I call smaller private equity funds also sometimes as venture capital funds, right?
Okay.
Typically, venture capital funds back टेक्नोलॉजिकल स्टार्टअप्स, दे बैक टेक्नोलॉजी, एटसेट्रा. तो एक अलग सेगमेंट हो जाता है. बट स्मॉलर SMEs, राइट, जिसका 50 से 100 करोड़ का टर्नओवर है, कुछ अच्छा कर रहे हैं, नया फैक्ट्री बनाना है, एटसेट्रा. Then there are SMEs who are in the bracket of 100 to 200, 300 crores in terms of turnover, top line, plan, service, whatever, right?
Sorry,
Right.
I will interject in between. क्योंकि आप इतना बढ़िया तरीके से एक्सप्लेन कर रहे हैं, आप सबसे पहले हमें ये बता दीजिए कि एक SME कंपनी की डेफिनेशन क्या होती है इन टर्म्स ऑफ देयर टर्नओवर और इन टर्म्स ऑफ देयर कैपिटल. क्योंकि जब हम ये बोलते हैं स्मॉल कैप, मिड कैप, लार्ज कैप, ठीक है, तो आप उसको कैसे डिफाइन करते हैं?
सो ऑनेस्टली रसेश, ये डेफिनेशन जो है वो बहुत ही कॉम्प्लिकेटेड है, राइट? इन द सेंस दैट डिफरेंट पीपल कट द डेफिनेशन डिफरेंटली, राइट? एक है रेगुलेटरी डेफिनेशन जो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया का है, विच इज़ बेस्ड ऑन इन्वेस्टमेंट इन प्लांट एंड मशीनरी.
Okay.
There are caps of 5 crores, 10 crores, 50 crores, etc., right? Then there are stock market investments, right, which classify small and medium, call it micro caps, small caps, mid caps. उनका एक पूरा अलग ही definition होता है in terms of their market cap, right?
Okay.
Below 500 crore, below up 1000 crore, 2000 crore, 5000 crore, ऐसे उनके gaps रहते हैं. But broadly, I mean,
Yeah.
something which cuts properly, right, is anyone from a 10 crore top line, right,
Okay.
turnover, right, to generally a 100 crore to a 200 crore top line is a classic example of a small enterprise, right? Anyone who's over those limits, right, is generally a medium enterprise, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
broadly, I have seen, right, obviously there are ways to classify as per a particular regulation or as per a particular act, but generally small caps are those, or small companies are those companies which have from a 10 to a 100 crore top line, 150 crores. On top of that, you will have generally medium enterprises, right?
Okay.
Whether we see banks, institutions, etc., these are the way they cut it out, right?
Right.
So when you essentially will, and this came from your question, right, that
Yeah.
you are visiting more tier 1, tier 2
Yeah.
companies, you're
Yeah.
seeing companies, you're seeing smaller companies, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. So I'll focus on those companies which actually are forming a fundamentally large part of the SME ecosystem, right? क्योंकि वहाँ पे सबसे ज़्यादा एम्प्लॉयमेंट हो रहा है, वहाँ पे सबसे ज़्यादा ग्रोथ हो रहा है, वहाँ पे सबसे ज़्यादा केपेक्स हो रहा है, right?
Okay.
जब आपने बोला you're going, people are putting up newer factories and bigger
Yeah.
factories. So that's the segment that I'll talk about mostly,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So these are generally mid to large enterprises which have between, let's say, from 100 to 500 kind of a spectrum. मैं थोड़ा spectrum increase कर देता हूँ because इनके challenges थोड़े similar होते हैं. उनको जब कैपिटल चाहिए रहता है, उनके पास क्या क्या चॉइसेस रहते हैं? उनके पास चॉइस रहता है कि जाए, दे कैन गो टू अ ट्रेडिशनल बैंक, दे कैन ऑल्सो नाउअडेज गो टू स्मॉलर or mid-sized private equity funds where they can raise between 50 crores to 100 crores to 200 crores in terms of capital, basically. What is private equity, right? Let's understand. काफ़ी दुनिया में इन्वेस्टर्स रहते हैं. इन्वेस्टर्स के पास पैसा रहता है, इन्वेस्ट करने का एक्सपर्टीज नहीं रहता है. तो जिसके पास इन्वेस्ट करने का एक्सपर्टीज रहता है उनको फंड मैनेजर बोलते हैं. वो जो इन्वेस्टर्स होते हैं उनसे पैसा लेते हैं,
Okay.
और सॉरी, एंड उनको बोलते हैं कि मैं इसमें अच्छी अच्छी कंपनियों में इन्वेस्ट करूंगा. सो दैट्स द होल कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ अ प्राइवेट एक्विटी फंड एंड अ फंड मैनेजर. सो दीज फंड मैनेजर्स टेक कैपिटल फ्रॉम मल्टीपल इन्वेस्टर्स, क्रिएट अ फंड, एंड दिस फंड विल हैव एन ऑब्जेक्टिव कि मैं मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में करूंगा इन्वेस्टमेंट, मैं रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी में करूंगा, मैं स्टार्टअप्स में करूंगा, एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. दिस प्राइवेट एक्विटी फंड, इफ ही इज फोकस्ड ऑन, लेट्स से आप एक एग्जांपल ले लीजिए, कोई टियर 2 में काम कर रहा है एंड ही इज, लेट्स से, इनटू पैकेजिंग सॉल्यूशंस, और वो पैकेजिंग की फैक्ट्री डाल रहा है, एंड देयर आर फंड्स हु सी दैट पैकेजिंग एज एन इंडस्ट्री इज ह्यूज, हैज अ लॉट ऑफ पोटेंशियल in the future, and yes, and this is a good player having very good customers, very good clients, and I want to back them. Some technology angle is there, they have filed some patents, etc. एग्जाम्पल के लिए बोल रहा हूँ. सो दे विल टेक दिस कैप, गो टू अ प्राइवेट एक्विटी फंड एंड शोकेस देमसेल्व्स कि मैं ये कर रहा हूँ, मेरी ये फैक्ट्री है, ये अभी नया काम करना है, इसके लिए मुझे 150-200 करोड़ रुपया चाहिए, यू प्लीज गिव दिस मनी टू मी. सो दैट्स वन वे ऑफ रेजिंग कैपिटल. प्राइवेट एक्विटी में ज़्यादातर क्या होता है, आप 1-on-1, जैसे मैं आपसे बात करूँ, आप एज अ बिजनेसमैन आप 1 या 2 पर्सन से बात करोगे और डिसीजन मेकिंग क्विक हो जाता है. करूँगा तो करूँगा, नहीं करूँगा तो क्यों नहीं करूँगा, एंड इफ आई एम गोइंग टू डू इट देन ऑन व्हाट आर द टर्म्स, मीन्स आपकी कंपनी में कितने टके का भागीदार होगा, 10%, 15%, 20%, क्या राइट्स होंगे, आप कब मुझे पार्टनर में से एग्जिट दिलाओगे, विच मीन्स आप कब, आज मैं आपका पार्टनर बनाऊँ तो 5-1 साल के लिए बनाऊँ, राइट, 5-7 साल के लिए, तो आप मेरे को कैसे एग्जिट देंगे. ये सब डिस्कशन प्राइवेट इक्विटी फंड के साथ होता है. तो कमिंग बैक टू द पॉइंट, एक ये सोर्स हो गया इसके लिए. देन देर इज लार्जर प्राइवेट इक्विटी फंड्स, राइट, वेयर एंड समटाइम्स इवन सेक्टर फोकस प्राइवेट इक्विटी फंड्स. सो आप कभी मेडिकल इक्विपमेंट्स इंडस्ट्री जाइए, आप कभी मेडिकल इंडस्ट्रीज में जाइए, हॉस्पिटल्स में जाइए, सो यू हैव अ लॉट ऑफ फंड्स हु आर सेक्टर स्पेसिफिक.
Okay.
So you'll have pharma specific funds.
Okay.
You have renewable energy specific funds. उनका एडवांटेज क्या होता है, राइट? व्हाट इज द एडवांटेज ऑफ दिस प्राइवेट इक्विटी फंड्स? दे ब्रिंग कनेक्शंस, दे ब्रिंग अपॉर्चुनिटीज. आपके टीयर 1 टीयर 2 एंटरप्रेन्योर्स रहते हैं, उन्होंने लाइफ एक डायरेक्शन में देखा है, एक दिशा में देखा है, एक पर्सपेक्टिव से देखा है. These fund managers of private equity funds generally have seen more life, right? In terms of scope, scale, location, geography, etc., etc. So they bring those connections. कभी कभार यूरोप को कोई एक्विजिशन आ गया, यूएस में कोई एक्विजिशन आ गया, tapping a totally different market का concept आ गया. So all of this is given by these private equity funds as connections to them, right? So sometimes expertise and connections become more important.
Correct.
Opportunities become more important.
Yeah.
That is the time one, apart from money, of course, that is the time that one goes beyond good private equity funds, good private equity fund managers, etc., etc., etc. So that is one way. The last bit is, which is recently opened, and I mentioned it earlier, was the entire SME IPO cult, which has come up. Obviously, आज बहुत ज़्यादा froth है, frenzy है, a lot of excesses are getting built in the system. But if one removes the noise and the distraction, what is happening? This traditionally starved Indian SME entrepreneur, which always used to go for traditional based funding, today has a great opportunity to tap equity capital markets through the SME exchange
Okay.
platform of Bombay Stock Exchange or National Stock Exchange, to go there and tap capital from the public. So आज से 5 साल पहले average size of an SME IPO used to be 10 crores and all of that stuff, which is very, very small for an IPO, to be honest, right? Now the average sizes of SME IPOs have gone from between 50 crores to 75 crores, right? That's reasonable size. Though I believe anything between 50 and 100 is absolutely ideal for these larger SMEs that I'm talking of, right? If you raise that kind of capital from public markets today, the entire market has matured. तो पहले SME markets में ऐसा हुआ करता था, आपके और मेरे जैसे इंडिविजुअल्स होते थे. आज SME फंड्स में, SME में इंडिविजुअल्स को रिप्लेस करते हुए काफ़ी इंस्टीट्यूशंस आ गए हैं. You have lots of institutions who are seeing this SME cult and this entire SME का जो इम्पोर्टेंस इंडिया में है, उसको जो फॉर्मलाइजेशन हो रहा है उस पूरे सेक्टर का, उसको वो बहुत करीबी से देख रहे हैं. एंड दे आर नाउ सीइंग दैट यस, इफ आई एम गोइंग टू गेट इनटू दिस पर्टिकुलर SME एट दिस स्टेज ऑफ देयर life, then I have a very, very stable and steady growth that I can see over the next 5 to 10 years, that this SME will become an ME, and ME will become this small and medium enterprise will become a medium enterprise, and this medium enterprise is eventually going to become a large enterprise. ऐसा हमको feeling आता है as an institution. वो देख के then they will bet on them. और ऐसे काफ़ी हद तक कंपनी फंड्स आ रहे हैं जो ऐसी कंपनीज को बैक करना चाहते हैं. So currently I'm extremely excited about the fact that a lot of these SMEs who had always an aspiration to grow but were not able to grow because of right source of capital are getting a huge leg up because of the amount of IPOs that are coming, right? And I'll just reiterate the entire background. In 23, in the full year of 23, there was something like 125 IPOs. And in FY24 itself, right, there were like more than 200 IPOs, right, where you raised more than 6,300 crores of capital. From those, and I'm talking all these statistics are related to small and medium exchange IPOs.
Correct.
Only, right? And only in this year from Jan, you have almost like more than 120 IPOs, right? Out of this, I think 60 odd companies would have given 100% plus gains on listing, right? So this entire cult is getting developed. Yes, there are excesses in the system. Eventually, a kabhi na kabhi will get more rational, more reasonable. But if there is a good SME, if there is a good proposition, a lot of additional sources of funds are today available. So I talked about bank funding, I talked about private equity funding, I talked about the entire listing that one can go through. And the last thing I'll talk about is actually, and not many people are talking about this, but there is a huge M&A landscape developing in India, right?
Okay. When you say M&A, it is mergers and acquisitions.
Yes. So there are two ways a company can grow, right? That there is an organic way and there is an inorganic way. Organic way is मुझे डिमांड दिख रही है, मेरे को कस्टमर बता रहा है, मेरे को एडिशनल प्रोडक्शन चाहिए, तो मैंने खुद एक नया लैंड लिया, नया फैक्ट्री डाला, नए मशीन लाए और मैंने प्रोडक्शन करके चालू कर दिया. दैट इज ऑर्गेनिक वे.
Okay.
द अदर वे इज इनऑर्गेनिक, राइट?
Okay.
दैट आई विल गो एंड बाय a factory of some other player in some other location, pay him money and make him a part of my setup. So as this entire SME portfolio and SME growth is happening, there's a lot of M&A happening, right? Why does M&A happen? Because essentially everyone is growing fast.
Yeah.
सब फास्ट ग्रो कर रहे हैं और फास्ट ग्रो करना है.
Right.
तो समटाइम्स गोइंग देयर, सेटिंग अप एवरीथिंग, नई नई चीज़ें करने का. सो देयर इज अ लर्निंग कर्व, देयर इज अ टाइम एंड देयर इज अ लर्निंग कर्व. 2-3 साल लग जाता है कोई भी चीज़ नहीं करने में. ये टाइम को कम करना है, एलैप्स करना है. देन व्हाट पीपल विल डू, दे विल गो फाइंड अ suitable candidate and try and acquire that company. So there's a lot of work that is going on there. So one is identification and second is funding for this. आज उनके भी सोर्सेज काफी एप्लीकेबल है. सो लॉट ऑफ बैंक्स गिव मनी फॉर मर्जर्स एंड एक्विजिशन, लॉट ऑफ
Okay.
फंड्स गिव मनी फॉर मर्जर्स एंड एक्विजिशन. सो
Okay.
दैट इज एन एंटायर डिफरेंट सेगमेंट that is happening, and we call this consolidation. A lot of SMEs at the top end, right, are trying to do consolidation so that they can scale up. Because the biggest challenge in SME segment is scaling up. मैं 100 करोड़ की कंपनी को 1000 करोड़ की कंपनी कितनी जल्दी और कैसे बना सकता हूँ? That's a question that is there in a lot of SME entrepreneurs mind because it's growth.
Correct.
And India में हम क्यों ये बात कर सकते हैं? Because India is growing. So there are two ways to do it. One, you do it organically. One, you do it inorganically. And the third way is to do it bit of organic and a bit of inorganic. So with this entire spectrum of funds, you have banks, traditionally banks, private equity funds, your exchanges, and your M&A capital that is available. Clearly, SMEs are in fantastic space today, right? If you have a good, valid business, right, and you see a lot of potential, you will figure out a way to grow using one of these methods.
Brilliant, brilliant. So that was so positive, optimistic, and hopeful, for all SME players and players who are highly aspirational and want to grow their businesses, especially players in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And as you very rightly said, that a few years ago it was difficult for them to
Correct.
access or to
Absolutely.
have an access to funds,
Absolutely.
which has become much easier today.
Correct.
Manish, since you are a chartered accountant, and you also, advise corporates and do a lot of other activities related to corporates, there is one question that comes to my mind, that India typically, has been inadequately, when I say India, I mean the Indian companies. The Indian companies have been inadequately formalized, financialized, digitized, and skilled. Do you think that is one of the reasons why India still has this unemployment problem? In fact, I would want to ask you, does India have a jobs problem or a wages problem?
So if you have a very skilled set of people, right, I'm pretty sure that in today's market, they will get a job in India at a respectable wage rate because they will be performing and adding value to that particular employer, right?
Okay.
Now, if you don't have as skilled people, or you have a multitude of people who are not that skilled or semi-skilled, you will have a lot of people who want employment, but a lot of people who cannot give employment, right? So you have so many people. When I talk to so many CEOs and so many entrepreneurs, they tell me that we're just not getting the right talent. And when you say the right talent, it's not that if you read statistics, India produces so many engineers, so many accountants, so many professionals, so many doctors, etc. So I don't think the challenge is on the number what we produce. It is on the quality that we produce.
Right.
So if at all we need to really address the jobs problem, or we need to actually take India to the next level, the way is to ensure that we produce adequately skilled people and just not people who have a degree for the sake of a degree.
Yeah,
Right? I think that's the core problem.
Yeah.
And sometimes you treat the result and sometimes you treat the cause. So when you see unemployment rates, when you see disparity in salaries for engineers in different states, different cities, etc., I think those are results of a cause.
Yeah.
The real cause is that the skill level
Yeah.
of certain segment of people is really, really poor
Yeah.
for them to be almost unemployable.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to address. And hopefully with this NEP or the new education policy or this entire amount of Skill India and all of these initiatives, at least we will be able to make more job relevant talent. So that's
Excellent.
the hope. That's the hope.
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah. This whole thing about NEP reminds me of Mahatma Gandhi. So in 1927, Gandhiji gave a speech in Wardha where he spoke about Nai Talim and he spoke about experiential education, where he actually said that when you ask a kid who's given his 10th exams to choose which subjects to, take and, go further with his education, it is like child marriage. How can you do that? This entire system of 10 plus 2 plus 3, he said needs a lot of refinement. And he spoke about vocational training and, which is skilled India movement today. So, Manish, as a chartered accountant, as a company secretary, you're hopeful that NEP, is going to change a lot of flaws which were there in the system.
So I think what NEP will surely do at least is get the foundation changed. So essentially our old education system, which obviously was adopted from the British era, was essentially a system which was what they wanted to create out of us. Right? They wanted to create more bookworms, people who adhere to process, standard, etc., etc., etc. That's the entire system that we adopted, right?
Correct.
Nothing wrong. That was the need of the hour at that point in time.
Correct.
Today, we need a different stuff. So what NEP does is sets the foundation for a different framework, which is more agile, more dynamic, and more relevant to today's time.
Right.
So that's the first thing.
Right.
But if you look at the education system, we never had less of educational infrastructure. We had a lot of quality educational infrastructure, colleges, schools coming up all across the place. I think the real issue was the quality of the education that was imparted, the results that were got, etc. So the only skepticism that I have on the NEP is not on the foundation, it's on the execution.
Okay.
The execution has to be ensuring that we actually end up producing a quality graduate or a quality professional out of the system.
Yeah.
That's what has to happen.
Yeah.
That will be the real defining success for the NEP.
Right, right. Manish, my next question is, one of the most important debates which is happening today in the country, and it is about ease of doing business. So, there is a huge transmission losses, in the way the law is written, practiced, interpreted, and enforced in India.
Yes.
What is your take on the compliance universe?
Yes.
And do you think that is that is one of the things which is deterring or which is acting as an impediment for the ease of doing business in India?
So, to be honest, I think there are multiple takes on this. This is quite a complex question to be answered in one line. It's not a yes or no. I feel given the Jugadu Indian mindset that people have, right? And the formalization of the economy that is the intention of the government and for all the right reasons, right? I don't think it's a very, very bad environment in my view, right?
Okay.
So I'll take a few steps back and explain this, right? I think with GST, a large part of the economy got formalized, right? You have smaller entrepreneurs filing GST returns, etc., etc., etc. earlier GST regulations were far archaic than today.
Okay.
Then they started to simplify. Monthly returns in some smaller businesses became quarterly returns. Yearly audits were phased away. So, as the government understood the archaicness of what we are trying to do, they are listening and they are continuously trying to reduce the pain that smaller businesses are facing.
Okay.
So, I believe that it is only because of this amazing amount of digitization that the GST framework brought in, right from invoicing to e-invoicing, etc., that we have actually a lot of grip on what is going on in the economy, right? We have a pulse of what is happening, right? Every month you get GST numbers getting published very quickly, right? So it's fantastic. I feel and this could not have happened without the entire stuff that the government did. Increasingly, they are trying to reduce the complexity. Can the pace improve? Yes, it can improve,
Okay,
right?
okay.
But it does not mean that that's not the intention. That's what I guess from whatever I read, right? So clearly there is a issue in terms of ease of doing business at scale, right? But my take on that is WIP, it's work in progress. Increasingly, the government is trying to reduce the complexity levels as they go, right?
Okay. Okay.
I agree that in certain cases, the way the regulatory authorities, whether it is the tax authorities or the system, because of the data that they have at hand, they can come up with sometimes some complex set of questions or unnecessarily pushing people to give more and more information beyond a point in time happens. But in the larger context of the things, when you have more data at hand, you will be asking more questions, right? And that's the entire framework of regulation. So as long as you're doing the right stuff and you're on the right side of the law, right? I don't see that you should be an unhappy entrepreneur. Yes, you will keep on cribbing that there's too much of work, too much of compliance costs, too much of documentation, etc., etc., etc. That's there. But at the same time, it is this economy which is giving you growth, opportunity, employment, all of that as well,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
But I think we are in the right direction in terms of trying and simplifying things.
Okay, okay.
That's where I feel.
So, in a nutshell, what you're trying to say is that, this regulatory cholesterol, which was always a problem in India, is reducing, and entrepreneurs, business, the business community, gradually is on a path where they are formalizing. They are also becoming a part of the system, which will eventually lead to ease of doing business. Manish, since you are a chartered accountant, we would want to know from you, what is your take on inheritance tax? अभी elections हुए हैं, and during the elections there was lot of talk about inheritance tax. एक तो ये जानना है कि आपकी क्या पर्सपेक्टिव है, दूसरा हमें ये जानना है that don't you think more people should be brought under the income tax net rather than extracting the last bite from the rich?
So I think there are two separate questions here. The talk on inheritance tax, to the best of my knowledge, has been an ongoing discussion for quite a few years. And I think for all the right reasons, that has not yet been introduced. Whilst there's a lot of noise that keeps on coming closer to budgets, that there will be this, there will be that, etc. So my take on inheritance tax is to have it currently the way we are operating at this point in time. We are in a wealth creation mode as an economy. There is a lot of catching that needs to be done at the mass level in terms of per capita, in terms of savings, etc. So it's my personal view that this is not the right time for an inheritance tax.
Okay.
To answer your question on expanding the base of people who pay income tax, I think clearly that has to be the case. And as more and more people are coming in the job market, I today read in the morning news that our direct tax collections are up by 23%, right? And essentially today's data is all about individuals, right? So obviously individuals are, as we move up the value chain, we will keep on contributing more to the direct tax piece. Whether the base has to be increased, yes, but a large part of the base is not being increased, which essentially is related to agriculture, right? And I believe that the foundational level of differences that the government is trying to do currently by reducing the income tax rate for companies, etc., is a clear signal, right? That if the rates are reasonable, then people will fall more on the compliance side and then the non-compliance side, right? The other divergent view that I have, right, on this entire focus on increasing the base for direct tax, and this is a slightly more business view than a chartered accountant's view. At the end of the day, government has to collect taxes.
Correct.
Right? They have two methods broadly, right?
Yeah.
They have the direct tax regime and the indirect tax regime. If you see the entire GST regime and the formalization of the economy that has happened because of the GST regime, the GST collections are far, far more than the direct tax collections. And
Correct.
the direct tax collections compare very, very meekly increasing year on year with the GST collection. So at the end of the day, whether from this pocket or that pocket, the government is making money.
Yeah.
And the GST money that the government is making is even from those people who are not in the direct tax net, because they ultimately end up contributing to the GST paid, right?
Correct.
So as far as I'm concerned, right, one must relook at these exemptions, people covered, whether we can keep on increasing that base or no, etc., etc. But at a macro level, there is clearly tax buoyancy in the system. There is more resources that are available to the government. So that's okay. So whether there has to be an increased focus on expanding the base, yes, there has to be, right? But I don't think it's like an overarching problem that has to be solved as of yesterday, because from a tax collection perspective, government is doing decent.
Okay. That's again a very optimistic reply, Manish. One final question. Do you think India will consistently remain warm rather than too hot or cold?
You mean from an investment perspective?
Yeah, from
or
an investment perspective, from an economy perspective.
So the world out there is very uncertain, right? Earlier, people used to be able to predict for a decade. No longer the case with the amount of stuff that is happening.
Yeah.
But I clearly believe that over the next 5 years, if not a decade, I think the Indian entrepreneur, the Indian ecosystem, the Indian business community, and the job market is clearly in for a decent ride.
Brilliant.
That's what I believe. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. So India will keep on growing. Indian economy will keep on growing. The job situation in India will certainly improve because of NEP and the Skill India movement and rest of the initiatives which the government is taking. Overall, it is a great period for India, and it is a great place to be in.
It is. I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Manish, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. You are not only an eternal optimist, but I think the kind of vibes that you emit are also very positive. There has not been a single question where you've answered in negative. And I'm sure, being a chartered accountant, being a company secretary, you would be facing a lot of regulatory bottlenecks, regulatory cholesterol. But this podcast is a very good lesson for people who always find faults in the system. You are there, you are a part of the system. You advise people on how to avoid problems, how to nullify and mitigate legal compliance issues, and in spite of that, whatever you said was positive. Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much. And I just want to have one parting comment to what you said.
Yeah.
If you think about our ancestors, right, they have survived in the most extraneous situations, right?
Yeah.
And that's what Indians are known for, right?
Yeah.
last 10-15 years we've been saying that the government has been it's like government has been adding the cholesterol that has been needed for us to grow, adding the fuel that is needed to grow, etc., etc. Even before that, Indian businesses used to figure their way out, right?
Yes, yes.
Indian people,
Yeah.
at the family level, we used
Yeah.
to learn, earn, live in the most extreme situations. So,
Yeah.
so that is India, right?
Yeah.
With that mindset and that skill,
Yeah.
and that optimism, coupled with the opportunity that we have, just imagine where we can reach. And that's why I believe and I continue to remain an eternal optimist.
Super.
Thank you so much.
So resilience is India's DNA.
Yes,
Yeah. Perfect.
absolutely. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.